Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about white. Yep, we're talking about why white isn't that great, or hasn't been really that great. I guess you could make a pretty good argument that for a long time it was one of the weaker colors, sort of, but even still it had a lot of different things going on, a lot of really powerful stuff it could do. That we don't really see too much anymore, and mostly because the mechanics or the cards or whatever themselves were too good. So that's okay. That's okay. I did a video about like red and like its sort of very limited sort of mechanics you can draw on and like why it wasn't very good. This was a couple of years ago. Obviously, red has gotten quite a bit more, even just like card advantage. We're talking about like looting or the impulse draw, like the casting stuff from exile, like temporarily or whatever, like light up the stage or the Chandra. So yeah, I've got a lot of different stuff we can talk about. Obviously, red has been um, doesn't really suffer from those kinds of problems actually anymore, and it doesn't feel as one-dimensional. It definitely feels pretty good as a kind of plays like a spell slinger sort of type of deck. But white, no such luck. They've been working on it, but we've had quite a few issues with white, so might as well get into it. All right. At least in constructed, right? Because Commander is a different thing. I know they put a ton of emphasis on Commander. It's the biggest format now. Everyone plays it, and blah blah blah. But I'm not really concerned. I'm not really gonna be talking too much about Commander, right? Mostly going to be focusing on the like 60 card formats, right? So standard, modern, legacy, etc., pauper even. So yeah. But basic gist of what we're going to be talking about is white used to have a ton of very powerful effects, but through power creep or whatever else, other colors, their color pie growing, right? Stuff being shifted around. For example, I mean, even when like obviously white had disenchant for a long time, then that was shifted to green and naturalize, and basically white. It was only until very recently, last couple core sets, where they're like, okay, like naturalize is good, we need to have that in green, but also disenchant is also in white's pie, and it makes sense to have like actual disenchant. So a couple core sets ago, they actually added disenchant back. So that's obviously a good thing, but I mean, that's not gonna it's not really gonna make too big of a difference, but it is a nice thing. Um, so that's kind of, but obviously the certain things haven't gotten moved back to white or won't be, won't get as efficient. For example, like compare, Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Apparently, according to Morrow, these are too powerful, too good, too efficient, and their color pie breaks. Somehow, their color pie breaks, even though white. I mean, it's just very confusing. Doesn't make a ton of sense. But anyways, uh, so yeah, times change. Obviously, certain effects are way too powerful, and obviously, power creep has reduced the power of a lot of these different things. One in particular, the Weenie Creatures, right? White's weenies aren't as good as they used to be, unfortunately. At least contextually. At least I'd say overall, casting like a white knight or something like that at this point would be a little embarrassing. A little embarrassing. Wasn't always this way though. And there are printing like more powerful white creatures. For example, like Recruiter of the Guard. I believe that was in the second conspiracy set. So they are able to like put out more powerful white cards. Sometimes they just can't always do it in standard legal sets, but that's okay. Let's get on. Okay, so first and foremost, the thing that I always think of, especially like since white doesn't have a lot of good card advantage, of course, is Rebels, right? Because not only is it a tutor, it is card advantage. It's a tutor on a stick. So these kinds of effects are obviously problematic, extremely problematic. It's not impossible, I think, to balance it, but I mean, obviously they couldn't print any of these. I mean, I guess they could print them in like Modern Horizons 2, right? When that comes out, they could print some really cool, powerful rebels or something, but yeah, not like a standard set. Like that would just be silly. I mean, especially it's like the kind of gameplay it promotes. Like, obviously it's very repetitive. I mean, it's like, oh, all I have to do is resolve my Ramosian Sergeant, and then I, play my Defiant Falcon, and I just tutor up the rest of my deck, and it's like, okay, I mean, cool, I guess. Like, you can do all the stuff at instant speed, and then I do nothing. So that's maybe not the most fun. Obviously, it's problematic on a power level, but I think the mechanic could be um, tweaked, right? So like maybe it doesn't scale up, or if it does, it costs more mana, or kind of like how they did it in Time Spiral, but maybe a little bit different. I don't know, but I feel like there's a lot here, a lot to go on. That'd be pretty interesting. Um, so yeah, Rebels very powerful, another source of card advantage. But again, obviously problematic stuff when it comes to gameplay, and power level too, obviously. So, all right, and we'll just talk about tutors in general. So these are miscellaneous tutors. Um, Obviously, Academy Rector, Enlightened Tutor, Tide, Land Tax. I mean, I guess Land Tax is kind of in White's color pie space, getting like basic lands and stuff. Um, Ditto for Tithe. But obviously something like Enlightened Tutor and Academy Rector are a little too strong, I'd say, maybe. Obviously Academy Rector is a reserve list, so that wouldn't work. But these kind of things, again, pretty powerful, pretty interesting. We just don't really get just any tutors at all because, again, they can be really dangerous. But more limited tutoring would be fine. Uh, like maybe the recursion, the Sun Titan recursion stuff might be kind of interesting. That's not obviously not tutoring. I guess that is recursion, but um, I mean, really, I think there's a lot here, especially with like the land tax tithe kind of stuff. Like Knight of the White Orchid, right? That's a pretty good card. So I think these would be pretty interesting to look at. Again, giving White a little bit more card selection, even if it's just limited, right? Even if it is just like maybe some sort of like tax rack kind of thing, right? Like that old engine. I think that would be kind of interesting. I mean, land tax itself, I don't think is really that scary, right? You need to do something with the lands. Just hitting my land drops for the rest of the game isn't like the most scariest, most powerful thing to do. But again, there's all sorts of different ways we can really take this sort of tutoring stuff. And again, I think that the Tide land tax stuff is in color. They just released some stuff in the like the Strixhaven commander decks that will like getting lands and stuff like that. Maybe do stuff with treasures. I don't know. There's a lot of really cool stuff to do. I think a lot of space here. Um, Again, if they were worried about applications like in standard or whatever, like too strong, and we just put it in like a Modern Horizon set, I think that'd be pretty interesting. And again, tutors like sufficiently narrow tutors, costed appropriately, are very powerful. Like I mean, even just look at something like Crop Rotation or Goblin Matron or whatever. These are very narrow cards, but pretty powerful in the right deck. So something like that, I think, would be something to really lean into. Maybe something to do with creatures, maybe some go wide stuff. That'd be pretty neat. All right, one of the biggest things why the old white decks were so good is because mass land destruction. And why was this stuff good? Because even though your deck was at least 2 or 3 turns slower than like the red decks or even like the green decks or something, um, you could lock up the game with like an Armageddon buying you another couple turns before your opponent can recover, and you can beat them down with your, Savannah Lions and your White Knight and Sarah Angel or whatever. So yeah, Armageddon, very powerful, very sweet. I can't ever imagine they'd ever print this ever into a standard set. That'd be pretty insane. I would love it, of course. I'd probably play Standard the first time in forever. Um, Again, ditto for Cataclysm. Uh, and again, there's also the sort of balance effects too, like Balance itself and Balancing Act. These are pretty interesting. Cataclysm sort of a take up on that too. Um, but to say that these have been problematic is, yeah. Even Balancing Act, when it was in Standard, it was in the Balancing Teens deck, so you could play a bunch of stuff, sack all your lands, Balancing Act, and play a Terravore off the mana floating, or like blink your Android Brush Hopper and wipe the board clean of everything. That kind of stuff is, yeah, yeah, that's pretty bad gameplay, obviously. To say nothing of balance itself, of course. We've talked about that enough, but needless to say, not balanced. Um, Something like Cataclysm is very powerful, but this feels like maybe more of like a legacy power level of a card because it's just so strong. I think you could probably make a argument for like Armageddon, in modern at least. But yeah, yeah. I think there's very little we're going to be able to see from this. They really just hate mass land destruction, and we'll never see it in Standard again. I mean, even in like 7th edition, they didn't bring back Armageddon from 6th for fairly obvious reasons. But yeah, so there's something here. There's something here that could be done in like older formats, like Modern and stuff. But a lot of this mechanical space is a bit problematic, like power level wise, right? A little too uninteractive. All right, and now we have Weenie Creatures. So we got stuff like Savannah Lions, Silver Knight, Soltari Priest. These cards were basically just good on rate, right? Back in the day, they were powerful, and they didn't have any drawbacks other than their intensive mana costs. And they weren't like outclassed by everything else. They were very good because having pro red was obviously very good against the red decks. So these were contextually like very strong or pretty good at least. Um, in fact, Savannah Lion was probably the most aggressive creature up until a very long time, right? Best sort of aggro creature was Savannah Lions. So now it's like we don't really have that at all. Like pretty much all along the curve, it feels like a lot of White's weenie creatures are just outclassed. I mean, there's like obviously there's stuff like Death and Taxes, um, but yeah, for the most part, we're not getting good rates on these things. Like obviously Stoneforge Mystic is a good rate, right? Because it's a free card, and you can do all sorts of instant speed tricks and stuff, and avoid counter magic and things like that. But for the most part, these cards are not that great on rate for the most part. Obviously, something like Mother Runes is still very powerful, but pretty obnoxious to play against, and isn't something you really want to see in something like Standard, or even Modern, apparently, since they printed Giver of Runes. Weathered Wayfarer is a pretty interesting card. It'd be an interesting card to put in like a core set when you have a bunch of land stuff, because you can do cool stuff with fetch lands. And in older formats, you have stuff like Wasteland and Ghost Quarter and stuff like that. So that's pretty neat. But we do have quite a bit of utility guys, which is pretty nice. That's pretty nice. But yeah, like just the random attacking dudes just isn't going to cut it anymore. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's that good these days. I mean, look, I mean, White just doesn't have like any sort of really busted like weenie creature or even like fatty. Like the best, what the best fatty it has is what Baneslayer Angel. I mean, like it's good, but like you can just remove it and it's like okay, like it attacks twice, you remove it and it's like okay, they gain some life, like a lot of life, but um, like you probably come out on the mana, right? I mean, because it's 5 mana. So yeah, not a lot of really good fatties, which is unfortunate because their weenie creatures again are nothing to write home about a lot of the time. I mean, there's not as many Thalias as we'd like. Um, but yeah, so this is again another part where I think they really need to ramp up the power of these cards. Like just give white, like a really good reason to play white weenie, right? You know, instead of just having faceless Haven be your payoff for being mono white. So, all right, and then of course we have miscellaneous stuff. Um, we have sort of kind of like the lock piece or whatever, represented by humility. Of course, humility itself is obviously reserve list, one of the most frustrating and confusing cards to play against because of all the layers and all that dumb crap. Obviously very powerful, but getting a card like humility or playing around in that space would be pretty good, I think. I think that'd be interesting. I mean, they did print, what was it, Overwhelming Splendor? That was the white curse from the Amonkhet, or the second set from the block. So, yeah. Uh, Humility, a little too powerful, a little too obnoxious, but like, again, maybe temporarily, like, nuking everything, making it all like 1/1s, making them all very humble, you know, for a turn. That might be interesting. Um, but yeah, that would be good space to play in. Then we of course have stuff like Abeyance and Orm's Chant. These are obviously very good, um, very powerful against a lot of the combo decks. You can really screw them up, screw up their sequencing by chanting or Abeyance, you know, in response at the right time, whether during their upkeep or in response to a draw spell or something like that. So that's pretty cool. Uh, I don't think, I mean, it's interesting place, like design space, like these can't do X, Y, Z, so like silence and things like that, but I'm not sure how likely they are to bring it back, um, or even really how good it is, but it is interesting. Obviously, recursion stuff like Argivian Find is interesting, but I actually think the best space to play around in is the sort of um, Sun Titan, like permanents like 3 or less, you know, put them into play. I think that's pretty awesome. That's pretty interesting. So it solves the card advantage issue, and being able to utilize your graveyard without being overly reliant on it is quite good too. Replenish, of course, same thing. Obviously, it's another reserve list card, and this is basically only for Enchantress sort of style decks. But this could be interesting too, right? Maybe returning all like creatures from your graveyard that cost 2 or less, and it's like 5 mana or something, kind of like a one-sided living death or whatever. That might be pretty neat. Obviously, Caracas is not really in color anymore, and it's not technically a white card, but it is very important in the Legacy Death and Taxes decks. Yeah, so there's a lot of weird stuff, weird, like, I think the tax stuff, like any taxing stuff, I guess you could even say Caracas is like a tax too, right? Because then they have to pay the mana cost of their creature again. But any of the taxing stuff I think is very powerful. Obviously, stuff like, again, Thalia, very, very powerful, very good. Spirit of Labyrinth, right? Another lock piece kind of thing, slash taxing stuff. I mean, even like the card from like Paulo's invitational card, right? Where it taxes a card in their hand, kind of like a mesmeric fiend that that's white and flies and is um, a pretty good threat. So that's interesting. So it looks like they are doing stuff, really getting it. So yeah, but one of the nice things is we still do have pretty good removal these days. Um, I mean, it's good for standard at least. Obviously, in older formats, it's more or less going to be impossible to top like swords and path just for pure efficiency. Um, so yeah, so I guess like not getting good enough removal is more of like just a standard issue, but that's okay, no biggie. That you know things wax and wane in standards. That's not a huge problem. And we still get some okay prison stuff, so like the taxing or rule setting stuff. So that's pretty good. It does again seem like stuff they're really wanting to work in. Rule setting stuff, right? So like Rip, Stony Silence, things like that. I guess Skyclave is kind of like removal and also like a decent creature, although obviously no one's playing a 3 mana 2/2, right? But the fact that it can deal with anything that costs 4 or less This is quite good. This is very good. One of the best creatures, one of the best white creatures that's been printed in probably since like Stoneforge or Thalia or something. This thing is all over the place. It's very strong. So this is a really good card. Obviously, it sees play in the Heliod decks. Obviously, Heliod's pretty interesting, although that's basically just a combo piece, but it does some interesting stuff even when you aren't comboing off. So, but yeah, Skyclave Apparition, this is like super, super good, right? Because this is, again, another like white has good removal and it's really good flexible removal. And of course, this card plays very well with a lot of the blinking stuff. So white's been getting quite a bit of blinking sort of shenanigans, right? If we look at something like Eorgan, right? Or, you know, older formats would have stuff like Momentary Blink or the white-blue blink card from Modern Horizons. I can't remember. So yeah, that's pretty sweet. Yeah, most of the creatures that they get are not very good. Obviously, big exception to Yorion or Skyclave, or I guess Lurrus too. But yeah, I think we could really ramp up like just the raw power, like maybe give something protection, maybe, you know, make it a little bit undercosted, give it some sort of powerful ability. I mean, really, like these decks are so slow, they really, I think the creatures just need to be a little bit better. Um, and of course, right, like we mentioned already, you get some good stuff in the supplemental sets, which is nice, but you know, that's kind of, a lot of those things are designed specifically around Commander. And it does look like they're more willing to experiment with stuff. Again, primarily the tax stuff. So pretty good stuff there. Pretty good stuff. So I wouldn't worry. It looks like things are actually doing okay, and it looks like they are experimenting with stuff and trying to figure stuff out, and so that's kind of nice. So I think like this is one of the few things where I think they're actually making pretty good progress. I think, you know, stuff like Death and Taxes and Legacy is pretty interesting, is pretty good. I would like to I would like to see them work on having like white stuff work better together, right? It's supposed to be like the color of cooperation and small creatures. So like how about an army of small creatures like all working together, but it's like there's nothing really like that. I mean, obviously rebels, but um so yeah, other than that, I mean, it's like it doesn't really have any good tribes. So it seems weird like you're just playing like these kind of like, you know, just random dorks and they don't really work well together, which always confuse me a little bit because it seems like they should. Like that's what White's big thing is, working together to do stuff, and it's like they don't really emphasize that very much. So I'm not, and especially like since it's like okay, these creatures are just like worse than the one the greens get. So like I mean, obviously look at any of the 1 mana 2/1s green gets or white gets, and then compare it to something like Hex Drinker. Maybe that's not the most fair comparison, but I mean, Hex Drinker is just like insane and can take over the game, whereas like something like any of the Savannah Lion clones are like fine, they're good, but they're obviously on a totally different level. But yeah, so I would say there's a lot of design space, a lot of past cards, mechanics, a lot of old stuff, precedents that they can look at. And so I'm not really worried. I think they can really like, you know, flex their muscles and start really experimenting with different stuff. And I think it should turn out okay. So don't worry. This is the only thing I'd say. Don't worry. Everything else will probably get worse, but I think White will actually probably get some more interesting cards in the future. So um, hopefully more Skyclave Apparitions, 1 or 2 more of those, and bam, we're talking, baby. Give me a White Questing Beast. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Anyway, so thanks for stopping by, guys, and have a good day.